Hi, everyone. You're about to listen to a conversation that ODEEP had with the Honorable Rolando Acosta while he was presiding justice of the New York Appellate Division First Department. Justice Acosta has since left the bench and entered the private sector. We are thrilled that we got to sit down for a discussion with him at this pivotal time in his career. We really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you do too.
Welcome to Building Belonging, a podcast of the New York City Bar Association and its Office for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. In this episode, Using Privilege for Progress, Tanya, Angie, and Mary Ellen speak with Justice Rolando Acosta, former Presiding Justice of New York Appellate Division First Department, and they're joined by his daughter, Zila Acosta-Grimes, an associate in Big Law. Justice Acosta shares the story of his early days coming to New York, navigating Columbia University, and building the Dominican community in Washington Heights and Inwood.
We need to all be involved in the life of that next generation. So it's not just important that we do it within our family, but also outside our family.
Justice Acosta and Zila compare notes on their upbringing and how they have learned to use privilege as power in holding institutions accountable.
We have to continue to insist that big law, that legal institutions deliver, that they participate in opening doors for people that have not been as fortunate as many of us have been to participate in society.
Justice Acosta talks about his efforts to modernize the First Department while he was presiding justice, and how modernization is also a project of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
It's important that everyone feels that they are represented in the institutions that deliver justice in this state and in this country, and that we participate in the strengthening of those institutions that undergird our democracy and our rule of law.
Opinions expressed are those of the speakers, and not necessarily of the city bar. Here's Tanya Martinez-Galanucci.
Welcome back to Building Belonging. We are so excited and honored, frankly, to have the Honorable Rolando T. Acosta here with us. And I'm sure many of our listeners know exactly who I'm talking about just because of his reputation. He's the presiding justice of the New York State Supreme Court Appellate Division of the First Department since May 2017. But you also may know Judge Acosta because Zila Acosta-Grimes is his daughter and spoke so highly and so beautifully of Judge Acosta. So we are super excited. We're going to jump right in. I'm Tanya Martinez-Galanucci. I'm the executive director of ODEEP, and I'm going to hand it over to Angie.
Hello again. My name is Angie Avila Lanciati, and I am the manager of development and communications with the office. And I'm going to toss it over to my favorite person, Mary Ellen.
And I'm Mary Ellen LaRosa. I'm the diversity and inclusion coordinator for ODEEP. And I'm going to hand it over to our guest today. You can introduce yourself and tell us, what does belonging mean to you?
Yes, my name is Rolando Acosta. As it was mentioned earlier, I am the presiding justice of the Appellate Division First Department of the New York State Supreme Court, which has jurisdiction over Manhattan, the Bronx, and some other parts, contiguous parts of Manhattan. It is wonderful to be here. I mean, thank you for inviting me. I mean, to me, to talk about these issues is always very important and have great meaning, have had great meaning in my life. And so to me, belonging, just simply means either being part of a group or leading a group in a workplace or generally in a community that are working towards one goal. To belong to the Latino community, for example, means that part and parcel of that group that is seeking through a collaborative experience to get to be treated equally as a marginalized community, to be part of the empowerment process in a society like ours under the rule of law. So that's what it means to me.
So speaking a little bit about your society and your group, we have someone special here, a special guest that I just wanted to toss over before we get into some of the nitty-gritty of our conversation. So Zila, you want to pop in and say hi?
Sure. Hi, everyone. If you've listened to the prior episodes, you know that I'm Zila Acosta-Grimes and an associate at a law firm in New York City. I have been Judge Acosta's daughter my whole life. known him my whole life, so I know a whole lot. And I'm really excited to be a part of today's episode so I can pop in and remind him of fun stories and kind of maybe provide a little bit of a contrast to our experiences. Because we both, as I mentioned on my podcast, we both went to Columbia. We both are lawyers. There's a lot of commonalities, but obviously I didn't immigrate here. I grew up in New York and have had very different experiences. So I think that'll be helpful. I'll pop in and out to remind him of fun things I know.
I think that would be super helpful. And it's just such a treat. I was just saying this before we started recording. I am so excited that folks will be able to hear just how beautiful and wholesome your relationship is. I tell you, every time I hear you speak about your dad or hear your dad speak about you, I just smile and gush. Like I have like vicarious feelings, and so I'm just glad we can share that in the world. So
well,
I'm going to hand it over to Andrew.
Thank you. But remember that from my perspective, it is probably one of the most terrifying experiences because to be interviewed with my daughter, who knows pretty much everything about my life, can be very scary. So
she'll be gentle, I'm sure.
And speaking of knowing so much about your life, can you discuss a little bit about your life growing up? Where did you find belonging? Did you have to build it yourself? And how do you carry those life lessons, those social skills with you throughout your law school, throughout your career?
Sure. I was born in the Dominican Republic, in the northern part of the island, a place called Santiago de los 30 Caballeros. And I grew up there, went to junior high school, arrived to New York at the age of 14 for the same reasons that most immigrants come to New York. My parents thought that they could not provide for us in the way that they wanted to, particularly, educationally and just participating as equals in a society like ours. So that was the reason that they made such an incredible sacrifice to leave their land, their friends, their family to come and basically start all over again. So I came in, I arrived in the South Bronx, went to high school, Dewickle in high school in the Bronx, a public school, and did fairly well. As you know, Dominicans are known for their baseball prowess. So I played a little baseball. I was, had an opportunity to play professionally out of high school and college, but decided that, with a lot of great advice from my parents and my then good friend and now wife of over 40 years, Zila Acosta, who told me, getting a degree, getting an Ivy League degree in particular, is going to have a much more impact in your life and the life of your family than playing baseball. In those days, you were 30-year-old and you're already a dinosaur. You're ready to retire. Having a career, having, a great education is only the beginning of the best part of your life. So I agree with that. I, wound up after being recruited in various places, wound up going to Columbia College in 1979 and did well there, play a little baseball as well. High school, I had done well academically. I graduated fourth in a class of 1,006 students. So went to Columbia College, did well there as well. And I was also able to play baseball, broke pretty much all of the Ivy League pitching records. I still have some over 40 years later. So I did that at Columbia and I decided to remain at the law school. So I stayed at Columbia Law School and, decided, graduated in 82, took the bar, entered the legal profession and, started working immediately in the South Bronx office of the Legal Aid Society Civil Division. It turns out that that's something that I wanted to do because it was my way of paying back. When we arrived, part of the difficulty that we encountered, my father got ill and, was not able to provide for some time. And, it was the Legal Aid Society Civil Division that wound up representing my family. So I thought, this is one way for me to pay it back. So I worked at the Legal Aid Society Civil Division for about 7 years. I rose through the ranks, ultimately becoming attorney in charge of the largest civil trial office. I also worked in the Catch and Dinkins administration at the Human Rights Commission. where I had a wonderful experience being part of the drafting team of the city human rights law, which turned out to be the most progressive piece of civil rights legislation in the country. And then ultimately in 1998, taking the bench, entering the judiciary. So I've been a judge for quite some time. So, but I'll stop there. I mean, one of the things that I always like to, because people would either take the baseball track or they will follow other track. The reality is that while I was playing baseball and at Columbia College and studying law, I was also, because I remember I arrived in 1969, so that was sort of the beginning of the en masse immigration of the Dominican community. We were mostly residing. We had moved from the South Bronx to Washington Heights. So we were congregating. I mean, we were growing as a community in Washington Heights and Inwood. Of course, there was no social service infrastructure of any kind to receive that new community. So there was no English as a second language. There were no citizenship classes, etc. So I was part of that group of young folks. Congressman Adriano Espaillat, he's now the congressman, but he wasn't back then. Same thing with, Commissioner Addis, who was also part of that group of young Dominicans. Dr. Raphael Lantigua, who has been teaching medicine and practicing medicine at Columbia Presbyterian for some time now. So we were part of that young group helping to build that infrastructure. So we were the ones creating community-based groups like Alianza Dominicana or Community Association of Progressive Dominicans that initially started as a think tank just to help us analyze and think through the needs of the community. But, later on became a social service provider, English as a second language, and a variety of other needs that the community was facing at that time. So it was wonderful that it was a parallel life, helping build that infrastructure at the same time that I study law and practice law at the Legal Aid Society.
Hearing your story, when my mother first came here from Peru, she came here at 18, and she, in Washington Heights, took those classes, took English as a second language classes. Yeah. And, she got her citizenship, and it was thanks to those programs. So, I mean, thank you for me. So my mom says thank you too, because that definitely set up a lot of foundation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's the kind of thing that you want to hear because, you do so much work and you do so many different things. And even as a judge now, you don't know the outcome of things. You decide the case, the issues that are in front of you. You present the facts, you apply the law, and you never hear what happened afterwards. So, same thing with the community work that we do. We don't know the impact on the lives of those who partake in those services. So it's wonderful to hear and get a little bit of feedback. That's the kind of stuff that, it's very touching. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I have to tell you that I'm sitting here and I am like, it's almost like I'm meeting a celebrity, even though I've met you before. I've even been to your home, but I get fluttered because I hear about all the things you did and why you did them. And I know how much it means for us, for the community, and for the folks who benefited from it. From my own mom, who became a citizen through one of those programs in Washington Heights as well, And I hear you talk about it, and it just comes so naturally. And I can see where Zila gets it from too, because it's like, of course, in your mind, the way you guys are looking at it, it's like there's a gap, there's needs here. Let's fill it. No one's gonna come save us. No one's going to do this. If we can do it, why not us? And I just have to tell you, you guys are heroes. You really, really are. And we're so inspired by your story. And I love how you're like, I play a little baseball. You said that like 3 times. I'm like, a little baseball. You know what you did. You know what you did. You have those records for a reason. And we're so honored. So I wanted to dig in a little bit into why you decided to go to law school at CLS. And I was just wondering if you can talk about the community building aspects of that and what made that a good option, and thinking about your undergrad experience versus the law school experience. And if you're up for it, maybe Zila can chime in too, how you've seen it grow and change since then, because then Zila attended CLS. So we'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, sure. Initially, I didn't start off saying, oh, I want to be a lawyer. To me, you immerse yourself in the work of the community at the same time that you're trying to better yourself and your family. But it was pretty clear to me from the get go that lawyers has such an impact in our society. Anytime that we needed resources, it was always the law firms that helped us with different aspects of the paperwork needed to be done that needed to be done to file a not for profit, etc. And it was clear to me that lawyers sort of permeated the entire society, right? We don't say this is a society under the rule of law casually. I mean, the fact is, lawyers are part of the executive branch. They clearly part of the legislative branch and the judicial branch. So every area is permeated by lawyers who have an incredible impact on outcomes. So to me, it was very clear early on that rather than be a psychologist and just help the individual clients that will come in for my services, that being a lawyer was more conducive to make a bigger impact in my life, the life of my family, the life of my community. So that's part of the reason that I stayed at Columbia. To be honest with you, I got great training at Columbia, but in those days, it was not a place that will prepare you to do the kinds of things that I wanted to do. Community empowerment issues, public interest work. Most of my classmates, in fact, I think all of them, no, most of them went down to work at in big law, which was fine. Maybe at that time I was a little, less tolerant of that. I think there was so much need that to me it was not an option, to go and make money. But of course, the reason that you do the things that you do, when I talked about improving not just my life but the life of my family, is that the next generation will benefit from those things. So in this case, Zila, she did go through Columbia College and Columbia Law School just like I did, although I was not in law review. I want to say that from the get go. So maybe I wasn't as smart as she was. But, Zila was, and I think I mentioned this earlier, she was sort of the kid that we all hated, in college. Those who are born of privilege and have benefits that none of us had. I mean, my parents had a fourth grade and a sixth grade education, respectively. So I had nobody to help me even put an application to college. So I had to navigate that entire, sometimes hostile world by myself. And those in my community, those around me, who were interested in my success. So I mean, I know I may have given that story, but I did at Columbia College 2020 graduation speech. And that is, I remember my first day of class at Columbia College, where I come in and, a class, a part of the core curriculum, arts, humanities, and, we're all sitting around, about 20, 25 students. And the teacher, puts up a slide and said, anybody know what this is? And I had no idea what it was. I thought I was well educated, graduated again at the top of my class at DeWitt Clinton, and every kid in the class raised their hand. So I'm like, uh-oh, looks like I'm the only one who hasn't been exposed to that. So, they picked on one kid, and of course he identified the Acropolis and the Parthenon and the two figures being Plato and Aristotle at the Acropolis, and describe how his father had visited the Acropolis with him that summer. So that's when I said, oh, I'm a little bit behind in terms of the kinds of preparation that you need to do to make sure that you succeed. But I caught up pretty quickly after that, and with a lot of help. You don't do all of these things, any of these things by yourself. So I had a very great teacher who probably noticed the panic in my face when I was not the only one raising my hand, and told me, one of the beautiful things about the city is that, I take this class and other groups Fridays to the Met, to the Museum of Natural History, to the great culture that is New York. So I will say, so to me, that was sort of the eye-opening experience of being at Columbia College and, partaking in that, core curriculum that really opened up a world that I simply was not familiar with just because I didn't have that privilege.
I will say the difference too was I was homeschooled. I mentioned that in, I think, my episode. And when I was homeschooled, every Friday, my dad would take me and my brother to every museum in New York. And at the time, I was like, you have to imagine, I didn't know my father as a person who was just my dad. So my dad was this very nerdy person who was obsessed with museums and made me listen to all this classical music, along with one weekend on other things. But, he made me listen to all of these things. No idea he had learned them all at Columbia until I got older. Like, he didn't know these things growing up. I assumed, well, Dad grew up the way I did, which is, with a very cultured parent who had, my children are in the background if you can't tell. But I also will note that my dad sent me to Greece the summer before I started college so that I would be, like you mentioned, the kid that intimidated him. Though I will note, I did not intimidate anyone.
I agree with that, Zila. You are if those kids who used to intimidate me were like you, it would have been a much better experience for me. Let's be real. I think, and I said this when we posted your episode online. I was like, I want everyone to know that we all have a lot to learn from Zila. Let's talk about someone who uses her privilege to empower, not to exclude, which is what we often find in that, like, the kid that we usually don't like in those spaces. But, something that you said also resonated with something we heard on the podcast already. Lisette Duran was on, and she was talking about having to build cultural capital, right? And one of the pipeline programs that she attended, taught them how to read a newspaper, how to hold it a certain way, go to Broadway shows. And, the idea there, I think, is important. Like, that cultural capital definitely helps, but I think it's so important that when we share cultural capital, especially with younger students, that we also explain, you don't have a deficit, right? You are not less of a person. You're not less smart. You're not less anything because you haven't done these. But we live in a society where these things are valued, and it definitely helps.
Right.
And I also want to remind kids, while they were building cultural capital on art and things like that, you were building cultural capital in other ways. It's always funny to me when people think that people with an accent or who misspeak on certain words and syntax or grammar because they speak other languages are dumb or whatever those stereotypes are. And it's like, that person can do the exact same thing in 2, 3, 4 other languages. In my household, we speak 3 languages all day long.
Yeah.
All day long.
Yeah, I always say that. I mean, first of all, we have a responsibility to make sure that we pay it forward, right? And I'm not the only one who does that. You mentioned Lisette Duran. I love Lisette, one of my mentees from Columbia Law School, but she also worked very closely with my classmate from Columbia Law School class of 1982. And that's Jay Johnson, who's a former head of Homeland Security, has been a poll wise, navigating the public sector and private sector basically since we graduated. So I know Jay has been a mentor to Lisette and many other students of color. And that's what we need to do. We need to all be involved in the life of that next generation. So it's not just important that we do it within our family, but also outside our family, which is why Lisette and you and, that sometimes my house feels like a hotel. You get all the community kids, you get all the friends, and, that's part of, it's very enriching for me as well as for the kids that participate in our lives. So it's great.
One thing I wanted to ask, sorry to jump in. One thing I wanted to highlight, I think you mentioned about how it actually surprised me that it sounds like you felt like you belonged more in college than you did in law school. And I was curious if that was because Columbia Law School was so corporate at that time, and if playing baseball in college had anything to do with you feeling like you belonged there. And maybe I'm assuming that. Maybe you didn't feel belonging in college than law school, but
I think that's accurate. And I think in college I was part and navigated through our various communities. I had, obviously as an athlete, I had sort of my friends, the Michael Heights of the world who wound up playing for the Yankees for a while. And Mike was my roommate on the road whenever we were traveling while we were playing. So that friendship, always gave you a sense of belonging to Colombia. And there were other communities that I had, sort of part of the intellectual life at Columbia. As you know, the college is one of the most diverse in the Ivy Leagues. And so there were not that many in those days. There were a handful of Latinos, a handful of African Americans, and we all sort of would work together, and share sometimes the pain. I didn't want to describe it that way, but the pain and the difficulties. I mean, a lot of my classmates in the college were first generation, and that's one of the things that I'm most proud of Columbia, that we target that population, not just brilliant kids, but kids who are going to college for the first time, like I did in the family. So there are a lot of needs there to sort of bring them up to speed in terms of culture and some of the things that they will need to later partake in our society. So, that wasn't the same necessarily at the law school. At the law school, basically talking about 300 kids, very, very few sort of urban kids like me, very few of us. Even the few Latinos that there were Latinos that sometimes come from Puerto Rico, from the island itself, who had gone to Yale, who had gone to Harvard, who had gone to other Ivies. So they were Latinos, but they had a level of privilege that I didn't have, and there were very few of us that were coming from other places and didn't have that kind of preparation for law school. So Columbia Law School was a little lonely, particularly for me, because I wanted to, I found a small community, and there was a small community of us, the Latinos, but also Jay Johnson, Esta Stetcher, who wound up heading Goldman Sachs, so we, Peter Harvey, African American former Attorney General in New Jersey and a partner now at Patterson Belknap. So there are not a lot of us, a few of us, and we hung out. We helped each other. Whenever we were down, whenever we didn't understand something, it was a group that really worked to help us succeed in law school, and it worked well. I mean, that class, we just had our 40th reunion this year actually, and it was incredible. Peter was there, Jay Johnson, Esta, all of this, folks, Carlos Rodriguez Vidal, who, was a great friend in those days. So it's like you see the level of success of that class that our own little group achieved. I mean, it was an amazing thing. But those were tough days. I don't want people to think that, we sort of breezed through the law school. It was lonely. It was isolating. A lot of the folks there did not have the same ambitions to be a public interest lawyer like that I did. So, for example, my wife was shocked that after my first year, I wound up working with Roger Maldonado, who's a former. So Roger hired me, and I thought he had hired me for my legal skills, but it turns out they needed a great baseball player to be part of their softball team. So he had just come from Yale and was the head of the housing unit. So in my first year at Columbia, I worked at Legal Services, Corporation B in Brooklyn, for $125. When my wife, found out how much the kids were making at Paul Weiss and other firms, she could not believe it. But that's the kind of thing that I wanted to do that. That's sort of why I went to law school, and, so I'll leave it at that.
I want to ask Zila to chime in here too, but so much of how you described CLS when you were there, right? And we're generations apart from when we attended CLS, really resonated with me. Like, I do consider myself one of the urban Latinas, right? Grew up poor, grew up in the projects. I even lived in the projects 1 year while I was at CLS because didn't have the financial resources and couldn't take out more loans, maxed out, right? Like took out all the loans you could take. And there were so few of us still, right? Still. And even though the population had grown, people like you and me, people who are first generations, zero generational wealth, so few. And I love that you brought up the public interest corporate divide and the moral injury it causes on people like us, right? Because obviously when I thought about what it meant to be a lawyer, I wanted to be a lawyer for the same reasons you did. I wanted to help. I thought it was a way to bring about systematic change because I was a teacher before and, I felt like I had this much impact as a teacher, with my students, a one-to-one, I did that. And I just felt really, really, defeated a lot of the times because you can only do but how far you could reach, right? And so, for me, it was like being a lawyer, have to be a lawyer because then lawyers do everything. Like you said, you can be in politics, you can do all kinds of stuff. And then I felt so deflated once I entered the law school because I was like, oh, I can't afford to go straight to public interest. There's no hope, right? There are very few positions. You have to have already experience. They don't have resources to train you. Even if you do get one of those few lucky slots, you're making peanuts compared to like what big law's making. And then you have, I'm going to call them the haters who are going to be like, oh, you're a sellout. All the suffering, all the stuff. I'm like, I know about suffering. I suffer.
Right.
Like, I'm a sufferer.
Right. And I learned that, let me tell you, and I learned this from Zila. So I'll tell you what I learned from my daughter. We grew up, I describe how I grew up and what I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it. And that sometimes you can develop a very parochial, way of helping the community. I know my community needed hands-on building of infrastructure, rolling my sleeves and doing that work. But one of the things I learned from Zila, and in those days, remember, Columbia Law School was $8,000 a year, which I was able to take care of because I not only had, TAP and other, programs giving my family income, but I was also, I had the UFT scholarship. I was the best athlete in the country and got the NCAA scholarship. So that was a lot of money. So I was able to pay for law school. So frankly, I didn't have the challenges that kids like you, that kids, I'm sorry about that. It's, when you're an old man like me, anybody younger than
I'm
50
flattered.
is a kid.
Someone has not called me a kid. I am flattered. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So, young people graduating from law school now, are coming out with debts of upwards of $200,000. That wasn't the case in those days. So it's very hard to do that and pay, to say work a legal aid like I did. I started making $18,500 a legal aid. Now they make $40,000, which is still nothing if you compare with the starting salary for an associate. But what I learned from Zila is, that I remember when you were creating all of these groups, that there are more ways of helping the community than just rolling your sleeves and building an infrastructure. You can, I remember you always told me you will go to big law in order to get the paperwork done. You would get resources from big law firms, all of these things that, frankly, why is it that we need to ask, say, non-marginalized partners and members of other communities for that money when we ourselves can be part of that community? Why shouldn't I be able to work in big law and use my skills and resources to help community? And she's absolutely right. I mean, she's been able to do incredible public interest, pro bono work at Deva Voice, and she has been able to contribute financially because she does make a little more than I made in those days. So it's, so there are a lot more ways of helping others and helping community than just being part of the building of that community.
100% agree.
I will also note, to your point, I think law school still tries to create this very, in my opinion, artificial divide between people who are going corporate and public interest. I think the times of going on this very straight linear path for 30 years, working anywhere for 40 years is just long gone. Very few people do that. Most people have long careers and they bounce back and forth and they go to government and they go to a firm and they go to a nonprofit and they do all types of interesting things. And so I feel like what's most important, and I learned this from my dad, like I was so stressed out. My dad and my mother both had such strong opinions about what they wanted to do with their lives. And I didn't have that strong conviction. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to be lost in the world. But you know what? You know what your values are. You know what you want to accomplish in the world. And I think you can look at work and law as a bit of a skill acquisition. What skills do you need to acquire to set you up for the type of career and the types of jobs you want? And it's not so linear of picking one or the other. And I do think that has changed. I don't know if you would agree with that, Dad. I do think it's changed over time. It used to be if you went corporate, you'd never get a public interest job. That community was kind of very purist in that sense. And I think that that's changed quite a bit.
Yeah, I agree. It has changed. And remember, not just, you get the Legal Aid Society, the board of the Legal Aid Society is all big partners from big law firms. They are people that are able to contribute resources and sometimes litigation skills and in-kind services to legal aid to help them to be able to provide services to the poor. So other changes have taken place, not just, the linear changes that have taken place since I graduated from law school and Zila graduated from law school. But COVID, the pandemic has changed the way we look at the world, the level of isolation. As you know, I'm a trustee at Columbia University and I see what the undergraduates are going through. I see what the law student, I'm part of the Dean's Council at the law school. And it's a different world, even going forward as a judge. I know that what I've had to do, the systems that I've had to build at the Appellate Division First Department, modernizing the court and live streaming. We talk about access to justice, for example. I never thought for a minute that when I was modernizing the court and building the ability to live stream our oral arguments, that was going to be one of my biggest tools to create access to justice. In the old days when everything was in person, sometimes, folks cannot get themselves down to 25th and Madison Avenue to hear oral arguments at the Appellate Division. Frankly, sometimes it's too close to 26 Federal Plaza and ICE. So, folks are not going to come down to the courtroom. But now anybody, you can view our arguments from a cell phone. You can view it from a computer. You can do it from all over the place. So how justice is delivered at the Appellate Division by watching oral arguments. Look at the transparency that takes place with the questioning that we do of lawyers and the particular cases that come in. And as you know, in my department, it's a lot of those challenges to our democracy, come in. AG's challenges to the Trump Foundation, that comes through my court. Mr. Giuliani's suspension decision, that's a public thing, that came through my court. We get the most challenging and complex issues that come through the court. And it's important that the public sees what happens. Well, how do they reach that? One of the things that I talk a lot about in terms of diversity and creating the level of credibility within not just the legal communities, but in the general community. The way you do that is not just by being transparent and having a diverse judiciary and all of those things that I've talked about, but it's also for the public to see that crystal castle and see, hopefully it is crystal. It's not crystal in other places. They cover it up with a lot of other things to prevent the public and others from seeing how we make the sources, but how we deliver justice. And it's important for people to see that, because when you see the challenges to our democracy, the challenges to our democratic institutions, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, that's one of the ways that we build credibility within the general community.
Mary Ellen actually has a question on this in particular as well, but I have to jump in because there's something that you and Zila were saying that I feel compelled to say here. Not only should we aspire to be in big law and boardrooms and corporate things, aside from just the public interest? I have to tell you, now being on this side of it, we need it. We need it. We need to be represented everywhere. Because I will tell you, I'm on this side of it now, right? The non-for-profit side. I'm trying to build community. I'm trying to get funds for much needed work and programs for our kids, for students who are in the New York City public school system right now to get into the legal field. The New York City Bar has done so much work in looking at where the leaks are, and we know where they are. But you know what my biggest problem is? Getting people to commit to helping us move the needle. People don't put their money where their mouth is. People don't show up. People don't volunteer. You know, we have this program that's phenomenal. You know, the Thurgood Marshall Summer Institute program.
Yeah.
It's been around for
I'm
30 years.
familiar with it. It's a great program. Great program.
You know how many partners we had? We had 27 law firms last year. Only 27. How many law firms are in New York City? You're telling me more law firms couldn't take on one kid? It's $4,200 for a summer. That's all you're paying the kid. You're telling me more than 27 law firms couldn't? So we need, and the thing is, here's the thing. We need people who value this, who are sitting in the decision-making seats to say, yes, we absolutely need to invest in this pipeline. It's the only way to get equity. So, you know, I want this message to go out loud and far. You can do good anywhere you are.
Yeah,
and we need to be everywhere.
No question about it. And that's frankly, that's one of our main handicaps as a profession. You know, there's so much, we lack credibility because we don't see our profession doing the kinds of things to bring people up, not just to partaking in a lot of the programs with the city bar, partaking in a lot of the programs that set up to build the life of our surrounding communities. Sometimes we get very myopic about that. And frankly, you know, we get an opportunity to test people's commitment to diversity, to inclusion, people's, commitment, and remember, I don't talk about diversity just, it's important to have black and brown folks and women in the workplace. No, to me, the composition, for example, in my court, the composition of my bench that happens to be one of the most diverse courts in the entire country, majority women. I was able to fill an all Latino panel in the fall that we celebrated. We have members of every community, including geographic communities. So it's not, so to me, that the value of diversity is not, sometimes people hear, oh, diversity, they think lesser. They think less quality, less, and there's nothing, frankly, it's an excuse not to participate in the life and to give to the life of of New York. And I tell you, I mean, just look at the example. I don't want to talk too much about this, but whenever one of us gets to be considered for a position of power, like presiding justice or chief judge, as in the case with Hector LaSalle, it's incredible, that you have the city bar, the state bar, finding someone highly qualified, preeminent qualifications. He didn't go to Columbia. He went to Michigan Law School, still a top law school. Has been presiding justice in the second department with me, has done an incredible career. And still, you find others that try to punch holes into what is a white shoe life in the law. And those are the challenges that we're always going to face because, frankly, if you have too many vowels in your name, and you hear me say sometimes, sometimes people will hear my accent and, your IQ drops about 30 points. It's only once when I litigated, it was wonderful because, they underestimate your abilities. And before they know it, I got summary judgment in my favor. Or, in other parts of my life, whether it was in college or law school, once they see that you're not only capable, but you're more capable than that maybe they are, then they change. Oh, but Rolando, you are Dominican, but you're not like other Dominicans. So they try to separate you from your own group because they notice that you are qualified, that you do have the necessary skill set to get the job done and probably better than they can. So there's always that. Listen, that's the what we need to deal with as a society. We need to get past people's differences and stop being so intolerant of those that don't look and sound like us. So, and that onto the legal, and part of the way that you accomplish that, part of the way that you do that is, by paying attention. I mean, we're going to continue, the city bar and others are going to continue to push the envelope. It's important that everyone feels that they are represented in the institutions that deliver justice in this state and in this country, and that we participate in the strengthening of those institutions that undergird our democracy and our rule of law. And I think that until we start continue to push hard and get convince as many people of the reality. Because not a lot of us, and I haven't been a city human rights commissioner, I know this, and frankly, some, an anti-discrimination law that I've written about quite a bit. It's the stigma is hard for some to overcome. Nobody wants to be labeled anything, and I don't think that that's the way to go. I think that we have to continue to insist that big law, that legal institutions deliver, that they participate in opening doors for people that have not been as fortunate as many of us have been to participate in society. And that's really, hopefully that's the society that we get to build, in the near future. I think we've done, don't misunderstand me. I think we've done great. I mean, I think this new generation and the level of sensitivity that exists is something that did not exist in my days, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm proud to be parent to a daughter who's married to a black man, and have black Dominican, Puerto Rican grandchildren. I'm proud, and you've heard me say how proud I am of my son who works in the Biden administration and is part and parcel of, to the White House in one generation is the way I like to see it. That's a wonderful thing. So,
So
so
beautiful.
it's
So
something that,
beautiful.
we're going to continue, and I'm hopeful that I like the way it looks, despite our challenges. And I've written a lot about what has taken place. The affronts to many of our institutions, through the executive branch and other places that has made it difficult. Sometimes we get a little complacent of our democracy. This is the best country in the world. Our democracy is an experiment that should be the envy of the entire world. But we sometimes get a little cocky with it. Sometimes we think, we're the only ones that have it made, that our institutions cannot be challenged. And frankly, we built a lot of our institutions not on statutory or precedent or creating precedent through U.S. Supreme Court decisions. Sometimes our institutions are supported by handshakes. What in the old days used to be called gentlemen agreements, now I call persons agreement, right? Challenges like, for example, what is the role of the attorney general? The attorney general is named by the president, but is he the president's lawyer, or is he the president of all the people? I keep challenging people to go to the U.S. Code and find me the statutory section that says that the attorney general is the people's lawyer rather than than, as a former president likes to say, where's my Roy Cohen, right? So we need to look at those challenges to our institutions, take precautions, and move forward. We can't just be complacent and think that we got it made and we don't need to do anything. We need to continue to be vigilant. We need to continue to work hard on those things.
How do you propose moving the needle on important DEIB issues with the understanding that the legal industry is wedded to antiquity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we have to continue, as I mentioned earlier. We have to insist on being heard. This is not work that we could coward from, or work that we can somehow stay away from. Our whole existence depends of it. The existence of our community and others that are marginalized and not partaking in the great experiment that we have. So it's important that we continue to insist on being heard and demand participation, that this is ours as much as anybody else's. The legal profession, we are wedded in antiquity. I mean, we take pride. I know in my court, whenever I get to cite to a Cardozo decision that's like 100 years old, it's like the best thing that has happened to me that day, right? We don't take change lightly. So therefore, I give you other examples, when in 17, when I became the presiding justice, in an attempt to modernize the court. You got to do a lot of hand holding, to tell my judges, no, we're no longer going to be receiving. We're not going to have an electronic case management system that's built on Office 365. And Office 365, we've been using WordPerfect since 1960. Yeah, no more WordPerfect. We can't do it. It doesn't work with Office 365. We need to do that. Our case management system only works through Word and Office 365. And yes, we're not going to have, a tome of thousands and thousands of pages that have to be filed by litigants before our court that perfect appeals before our court. Now we're going to have all of those documents electronically. You mean I have to get into a computer Yes, it means we don't get to kill as many trees as we used to in the past. So that means you have a Surface computer that you're able to access every piece of document that has been filed. I don't have to tell you, just one little example, just getting people to use Word from WordPerfect was like 6 months of pleadings and holding hands, and we don't take change. I mean, generally, very few of us enjoy change. It's not like I enjoy change. I find it necessary in order to move forward. So move forward a couple of years since 17, the pandemic comes, and it's precisely what we needed. My court was the first court to go online right after the pandemic. So we didn't have to wait much because we already had an electronic infrastructure. So we had everything e-filed. Everything gets done electronically now in the first department. But those changes just don't take place right away. So to tell people, oh no, now we need to talk about these things called, belonging and diversity and inclusion. Like, no, that's, we rather hire through people that we know. We rather talk about things that we know and people we're comfortable with. And, you're not necessarily very comfortable with someone with an accent like mine or with a darker shade or women. I mean, in my days, I remember Betty Ellerin, who's the matriarch of the first department, the first woman to be presiding justice in the first department. You would think that happened at the beginning of the century, but that only happened, you know, 20 years ago. Then Angela Mazzarelli came. Now I have a majority women in my court. My entire constitutional bench are women other than me. So that tells you. And the court has changed. Litigants have taken a while to get used to that idea. Now you can have a bench that's entirely women, or a bench, it looks different. It feels differently. The deliberations are different in my court because I like to think that having a diverse bench and having, folks who are more collaborative and able to hear each other out and their differences, I think, brings forth a better quality of justice. Change is not easy. So, for all, that's why we need to keep insisting. And that's why I also don't believe, the way that you bring people to change is to hit them over the head with a hammer. That's just, I think there are people of goodwill there in our profession that understands that, just like their generation went through their own struggles, Latinos, for example, in my case, Dominicans are not the only ones that have struggled with, with a cultural rating into our culture or acclimatizing to our culture. Italians had their own difficulties, Irish entering law enforcement. So let's not think that we are unique. I think that the time has come, however, where our world has changed so significantly that we need to take into account the great values and contributions of every member of our society, not just men, not just, Caucasian men, not just this group or that group, but everyone. We need everyone's participation in order for us to continue to grow this wonderful experiment.
And what an amazing and beautiful way to end this conversation. I have to tell you, Judge Acosta, I'm in awe of you. Thank you so much for being here. I am, honestly, I don't know what we did to deserve you, but I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for leading the way you do.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to our conversation with Justice Acosta. We're excited to kick off a new segment of the podcast, and we need your help. Every episode, we'll share some of our favorite deep articles, books, videos, social media accounts, and podcasts. Today, Tanya, Mary Ellen, and I will jump right in, but in the future, we want to shout out the content that is having an impact on our Deep community. It's Deep for the people. So if you want to contribute, send us an email at buildingbelonging@nycbar.org. We'll pick one or two for each episode, and for sure we'll be giving flowers and showing love to our contributors on the air. Thanks again for listening. Okay, welcome to the first installment of Deep for the People. We're sharing some of our favorite Deep content for your screens. Mary Ellen, why don't you kick us off?
One of the resources I found very helpful in the last few years is the 30-day Do the Work course. This is a 30-day workshop designed by Rachel Cargill. Each day is something different. Sometimes there is a video, sometimes there's an article, sometimes there is a prompt for you to explore yourself further. Participants begin to understand, recognize, and deconstruct white supremacy in their own lives and in the world around them. And it's an exercise to foster intentionality. I got into it because at the beginning of COVID, I wanted to know what else I could be doing. What is the work and how do I do it? And this was a great jumpstart. And look where I am now. And Tanya, what did you bring today?
I mean, if you've followed me at all on anything, LinkedIn, here, wherever, you'll know that I am obsessed with RuPaul's Drag Race, and I have to talk about it here in case someone hasn't heard me talk about it. And that might seem weird to folks to say that this is a deep content piece that folks should be watching and engaging with, but it absolutely can be. I recently wrote about how I do believe being a RuPaul and Drag Race stan has made me a better person and a better parent. And I honestly believe that with my whole heart. And it's because, well, first, Mother Ru has learned and grown throughout her journey in having Drag Race. If you look at season 1 and the early seasons, the show was extremely transphobic. And that might seem surprising to folks thinking, wow, here's one marginalized community marginalizing a subset of the same community. And it just goes to show you just how deep and internalized folks can have these views, right? And we have seen the show grow and develop and it become more and more inclusive with every season in every possible way. And I will tell you, time and again, you watch the show and you hear the stories of these folks and how they came to drag and how drag has saved their lives. And you'll see there are folks whose parents love them, support them, and accept them for who they are, who they really are at their core. And those people are amazing. They are creative. They do all kinds of things. And then there are other folks who find drag, and thank God they did because it saved them. And they weren't accepted, and they were left out on the streets, or they ended up having addictions, or they ended up being assaulted and have things. And thank goodness they find drag anyway and find safety. But if you don't know anything about this community and hearing all the crap that's out there about these anti-drag laws and these anti-trans legislation, please inform yourself. Watch the show. Watch a few seasons. I dare you not fall in love with drag and fall in love with these communities. It's amazing. All right, Angie, what do you got for us?
All right, I'm throwing my hat in the ring with this Netflix documentary. It's called Crip Camp. It's not talked about enough, and I feel like I have been preaching about this documentary for a few years now. It was released in 2020 through Netflix, and Barack Obama and Michelle Obama are the producers of this documentary. So it starts off showcasing individuals with disabilities who were campers at this camp called Camp Jened. It was in the early 1970s, rare and revolutionary for its time. So, it empowers campers. It shows them what life could be like with accessibility. And then we quickly so it's fun all around. Everybody's having a great time. We quickly transition from the camp setting to these campers now becoming adults and becoming activists. And they participated in the historic 504 sit-in, which, so this sit-in was one of the biggest protests of the time. It was revolutionary. It was this sit-in was 28 days long. The Black Panthers helped out these activists. They provided them food. They sat in with them. They had their backs. They were partners. So this protest led to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act that we know as the ADA. So it's a lot of fun. I tell everyone to watch it because you're going to leave feeling inspired. You're going to leave feeling empowered, and it's going to make you excited to participate in something and feel passionate about something. So it's funny, it's moving, it's amazing. I suggest everyone to watch it. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and thank you Mary Ellen and Tanya and myself. To quickly recap, Mary Ellen is bringing us Do the Work by Rachel Cargill. Tanya wants us all to watch RuPaul's Drag Race and enjoy it, have fun, have some laughs, and be inspired. And I'm pushing forward Crip Camp. That's on Netflix. If you like what you heard and you have some ideas, send all submissions to buildingbelonging@nycbar.org. And here's your quick plug. Listen to our other episodes. You can find them on all streaming devices and on our website. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Building Belonging, a podcast of the New York City Bar Association and its Office for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the City Bar. Find more City Bar podcasts on Apple, Google, Spotify, or Stitcher, or at our website at www.nycbar.org/podcasts. This podcast was produced and edited by Eli Cohen.